We shall begin with reading this text together. And that is first to identify what exactly is the obligation for women when it comes to prayer. Because as you know, we spoke about this the first class, women are exempt from all those positive commandments, which means things you have to do at a particular time. Which means all the prohibitions in the Torah, thou shalt not, that's not in a position on time, it's just you don't do. They apply universally. Commandments you should do, with a few exceptions, the Shabbos and Pesach, there are 6 exceptions. But commandments that you should do, a woman is exempt, and the basic reason is she has a far greater obligation, family, and she can't just drop what she's doing and read the Shema. For example, the obligation to read the Shema morning and evening is time-bound. There's certain hours that it has to be read by. In the morning and evening, a woman is exempt. Now we're going to see, should she? Of course she should, but we're going to explore the obligation for women briefly, and then get the practicalities. So what should I say every day or whenever? So let's begin. I'm going to ask someone to, my dear wife, to step forward to volunteer. This is the rabbi's assistant. And always lovely assistant. Yes, and you'll help me there. Thank you. Let's read it together, friends. Razel? Okay, please read with me. Follow me as I read. Otherwise, you won't follow what's going on. Okay. Everybody has? Yep. So, BH. Thank you. BH, I guess, Baruch Hashem. That's what that stands for. Alter Rebbe, or Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, Laws of Prayer, chapter 106, paragraph 2. Okay, the Alter Rebbe, who's the Alter Rebbe? The Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman. This book that I held up, that picture comes, this book is devoted just to the story of the arrest and liberation of the previous Rebbe. It's called The Heroic Struggle. It's an incredibly inspiring read. The Alter Rebbe is the first Rebbe of Chabad. He authored many classic works. One of them is the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. Many codes of Jewish law have been authored over the centuries. His is unique in many ways. One way is, his code is the only one that gives the basic halachic reasons for the laws. Not just a cut and dry law, but the origin and the reason, the basic classical halachic reason. So this is chapter 106, law number 2, and reads, although women and bondmen, we'll leave that's a kind of someone who is in service, are exempt from reciting the Shema, and you know why? Because it's a time-bound commandment. They are obligated to pray. Because praying is a positive commandment that is not dependent on time. But the person might say, but it is. There's the morning, there's the afternoon prayer, there's the evening prayer. There are times. So he goes on to explain. For the times of prayer are of rabbinic origin, as we explained 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago. But the mitzvah of prayer, the actual mitzvah means commandment in Torah. That's what mitzvah means. A commandment in the Torah is essentially of scriptural origin. As it is written. Where does it say so? It says so in the following verse. And you shall serve him with all your heart. That's actually quoted in the 2nd chapter of the Shema. Now what does it mean to serve with your heart? You can serve with your hands, you can do it with your feet. How do you serve with your heart? The sages clarified the meaning of this verse, asking what service is performed with the heart, and they replying, this is prayer. Let's stop right here. So there's a commandment in the Torah that says, serve with your heart. It refers to prayer. The Torah does not say when, leaving it absolutely open to each individual, as you'll explain, to pray whenever and however as long as it is daily. So it's a positive commandment, but not bound by time. It is only continued that the Torah did not prescribe a specific text for prayer. Torah didn't say what you have to say. And every individual could pray with any wording he or she desired at any time he or she desired. Having prayed once, either by day or night, she has fulfilled his obligation according to scriptural law. So there you have it. To strip down the law to its basic, what does it say in the Torah, as opposed to what did the sages enhance and add, which is their job. But just the essentially scriptural law, it's a universal commandment to everyone: pray with your heart once a day. So, in answer to our question, is a woman obligated to pray? The answer is yes. Now the question is, what about, the 2 times a day, 3 times, must she pray like that? Let's continue. Based upon this view, there'll be another view coming in a minute. Most women do not customarily recite Shemona Esrei regularly, morning and evening. Let's stop right there. You will remember the Shemona Esrei means the 18th benediction, the Amidah. The Amidah is when the sages formulated prayer, the men of the Great Assembly, after the destruction of the first temple. It's the Amidah, that's the essence. The rest was added over time that augmented it. That's the essence of prayer. So he's saying that most women do not, certainly during his time, the Alter Rebbe, this is 250 years ago, women will get to this presently, were not as educated as they are today, although in Chabad they were, but that was the exception. I should say the Chabad, Rebbetzins and family, the women were scholars. In some cases, more so than the men. Some kind of funny stories where they kind of showed up, the scholars, with the point of law that nobody knew because it was an unusual case, and Dvorah Leah knew the answer. That's the Alter Rebbe's daughter, who was a great scholar. At any rate, but most women were not. So the fact is, they couldn't read, most women, till fairly recently. It's only, you should know, there was a woman called Sarah Shnira. She lived in Poland before the war, and she essentially began the whole movement to that girls should go to school and learn Hebrew and to read and become knowledgeable. And she began the Beis Yaakov, Beth Jacob schools. And there are many other girls' schools today, but she was the pioneer. Extraordinary woman. You should really get on the internet and look up her life. I mean, her story is documented. There's books on her. She was an extraordinary woman that revolutionized education for Jewish girls. It met with opposition initially, but she persevered, and it's universal. So, but in the Alter Rebbe's times, most women could not read. So relying on this view, namely, that scripturally it's simply you pray in your language once a day. They didn't daven. They didn't say the Amidah, morning and evening, because they make some request of God immediately in the morning, directly after they wash their hands. We mentioned this 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. We need to wash our hands ritually each morning before prayer. It's the same cup that you use to wash for bread, but it's different. Washing for bread is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or 2, 2, or 1, 1, different customs. But washing it ritually in the morning, cleansing ourselves spiritually, rededicating ourselves to God, everybody does the same thing. It's 3 times on each hand, alternating. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, filling up a cup and using lots of water. So everybody got to do that. So after they wash their hands, they would say a prayer, just in Russian or in Yiddish or in Polish or Hungarian, whatever their language, or in Spanish or French. And they fulfilled their scriptural obligation with this, and perhaps even the sages did not obligate them further. There's a view that says that's really all she has to do. There's no other obligation. So you talk in terms of obligation. And that remains. That's the bare bones of prayer. Now, even this we should qualify. Prayer requires 3 things. Praise, then you can request, and then thank. That's the basic model. We spoke about this also 3 weeks ago. The Amidah works that way. Praise, requests, thank at the end. In any language you want, that's essentially prayer. That's view number 1. Second view. There are, however, authorities who maintain that even the essential mitzvah of prayer originated with the sages. So this is a second view that says that prayer is not scripturally mandated. That is to say, the men of the Great Assembly, who ordained that one should pray by reciting 18 blessings in a certain sequence in the morning, and in the afternoon as an obligation, and in the evening voluntarily, as we spoke about 3 weeks ago. So, even though it is a positive commandment of rabbinic origin dependent on time, and women are exempt from all positive commandments dependent on time, even those of rabbinic origin, such as the recitation of Hallel and Rosh Chodesh, this is an exception. He's going to say now. He's building up with mid-sentence. He's saying, the second view says, prayer is to begin with mandated by the sages. It's not scriptural. And they mandated that you should do it at certain times, as we explained 3 weeks ago, paralleling the service in the temple. Nonetheless, this second view holds that the sages said, when it comes to women, it's an exception. She has to pray too, and say the Amidah. Nonetheless, this is an exception. The sages obligated women, nonetheless, to recite the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah in the morning and the afternoon, because it's so important, because prayer is a request of God's mercies. Now, Alter Rebbe says the halacha follows this view. So the Alter Rebbe is ruling that a woman who can, she can't, who can, should say the Amidah twice a day, morning and afternoon. We're giving you, the ideal. We'll soon get to the practicalities. So, Rabbi, what should I say? But you're hearing here that there's two views. Let's get them clear. First view is prayer is scriptural and there is no format. The sages made the format. That view says women have to pray. It's scriptural. It's not bound on time. Pray when you want in your own language. Second view is it's not scriptural. It all starts with the sages, but they said women are obligated to because it's so important. So when they formulated the prayer, the Amidah, Shachris, and Mincha, they said men and women equally. That's the second view. Finally, the evening service, which was originally voluntary, is different. Though the entire Jewish people have accepted it as an obligation, women have not undertaken it, and most do not recite the evening service even on a Saturday night. We'll leave that Saturday night aside. So what he's saying about the evening service, as we explained 3 weeks ago, it's not in lieu of an actual service in the temple. Originally, it was only voluntarily. Men took it as an obligation. Women never did. His final ruling, therefore, is, if you can, ruling is a woman should daven Shachris and Mincha, morning and afternoon, the Amidah. And that's more important than the Shema, again, because the Shema, essentially, she's exempt, because that is a time-bound obligation. But here, the sages made prayer the exception and said she should pray. So much, friends, for the basic law. Now, in terms of what should I do? You see, the thing is, it's a very individual thing. It's a very individual thing. It all depends on your proficiency in prayer and how much time you have and so on. And we were talking about, the do's and don'ts. You come late to synagogue, and what do you do and what do you say? So there's two issues here. One is, what do I say every day at home? And then if I'm coming to shul and I'm putting in those hours and I'm here, so what should I say? I don't read as fast as everybody else. I may not read in Hebrew at all, only in English. What's the priority? And then I come and I'm saying my prayer and the congregation is saying something else. May I interrupt my prayer and respond or not? There's hundreds of laws. So again, the two main issues are, what do you do at home? What do you do when you're coming here, since you're coming here anyway? So, in terms of home, again, it would depend on where you're holding in life and time and proficiency. Here's the extreme. There are women that pray everything, including Ma'ariv, nowadays, because they are scholarly, they're fluent in Hebrew, they've gone to yeshiva, Beis Yaakov, or other schools, and they're just immersed in it. And But that would vary too. During their family years, maybe not as much, maybe some able to carve out some time. Certainly after the children have left the nest and there's more time, many, the thousands probably, many thousands of women pray everything every day. Just like men, no different. That's a very high level, and that's, as you can see, not obligatory. Even the second view is I'm talking about the Amidah, not the whole prayer, but they would. So that's one extreme. So the other extreme is the first view. Once a day in whatever language. We gave out these cards. Moda Ani, say the Moda Ani. And the Shema should be said, even though it's not obligatory, but of the importance of the Shema, declaration of our faith. So you should say that too. And morning and evening. That card has only 2 lines. If you can say more, the Siddur has it, the next paragraph. That's wonderful. The Shema actually has 3 paragraphs, and the third one mentions the Exodus. Now we are commanded to remember the Exodus. That applies to women as well. You just have to not forget the Exodus. So there's an obligation to verbalize the Exodus. Many ways to do that, and one way is to say the 3 paragraphs of the Shema, because the third paragraph talks about the Exodus. So you're getting another mitzvah which you're obligated to do. It's not really prayer. It's remembering. I told you 3 weeks ago, Shema isn't a prayer, not talking to God. Moses is talking to the people, you're talking to yourself. We're declaring our faith. We're not addressing Hashem. We're declaring our faith, not petitioning or asking Him anything. But it's put into praise, we explained 3 weeks ago. Anyway, so practically speaking, the Moda Ani and the Shema, that's the foundation. That's easy. Transliterated in English, and that's fantastic if you do that. If that's where you're starting, just in this journey, that would be wonderful. Again, wash your hands in the morning ritually. Very easy to do. After you woken up and you're dressed and gone to the bathroom, we shouldn't pray. I think I mentioned this when we have to relieve ourselves. Since we're on to that, I should mention these things as well, in case I forget. We may not pray with any food in our mouth. I have noticed, nobody here, but people come to shul and they're chewing gum. No, that's a big no-no. It's just downright disrespectful. We're talking to God here. It's talk to me. God is saying, talk to me. We don't talk with food in our mouth of any kind. Since we're on that subject as well, we don't eat during prayer. We can eat before and afterwards, not during. Between Shachas and Musaf, one can. That's 2 different sections. But otherwise, within each section alone, we don't eat. Unless you have to have some water, you're not feeling well. I don't speak of extenuating circumstances. And the laws of interruption, this is a huge thing. But I'm kind of jumping to the synagogue now. We're going to go back to the house. We're going to go back to the house. And we'll get to the synagogue and how we conduct ourselves there. I want to say this too. Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, wonderful spokesman, eloquent. You read his stuff, you've heard him. You've met him.
We visited at a kibbutz school.
Right, he was in Montreal, spoke at the Shar, and he visited the schools when he came. Yeah, wonderful man, eloquent, author of many wonderful books and essays and so on. So you can watch this on YouTube. It's a 6-part series or 5-part high holiday prayer, all of 5 minutes. So Jonathan Sachs' prayer, maybe you get close to Rosh Hashanah, it's basic and inspiring, and he's so eloquent. In his introductory talk, he says, and this is worth remembering and considering, prayer, friends, for the soul is like exercise for the body. Like exercise for the body. You've got to exercise repeatedly. You've got to pray repeatedly. Exercise can be boring. Well, prayer can be boring too sometimes. We get distracted and it's the same words. But it's oxygen for the soul. And just like after exercise, you feel good about yourself, you feel like you're accomplished, the body is energized, your soul is energized when you pray, when you say those words in Hebrew or in English. It's a discipline, like exercise, but the benefits are immeasurable. I think I made this point when we first began this class. There's so many levels to prayer. There's, of course, request. But there's deeper levels of prayer. Communion, attachment, devotion, sacrifice, meditation. Meditation on God being the only reality. If our prayer is the way it should be, it changes our lives. We don't get hung up on the small stuff. There's a context. We have to pray constantly because we can lose it constantly. Because we have egos and we're petty by nature. We're human and physical. We need constantly to remind ourselves of what the truth is. Because our senses don't feel it. With sense of touch or our sight. So there's that level of prayer. And then there's just a level of prayer at its simple translation where praising God and lauding Him and so on. There's no... He makes this point in his lecture too. He says in one of his classes, these 5-minute talks, they say the Eskimos have 50 words for snow. He says, I don't know if that's true or not, neither do I, and I don't think anybody here does either. But he said, no language has as many words for praise like we do. No language. In the Siddur, sometimes in one paragraph, the Shoichenad, 10, Lord, praise. The translators struggle to find a translation for these words. And the question is, how much do we have to pray? So again, the deeper answer is, it's really for us to meditate on the truth of God and what's real and what's lasting and what isn't. But on a very simple level, God cannot get enough of us telling us how much we love Him. Even if we're just saying it and our minds are distracted. He wants to hear those words. Like you want to hear your child say, I love you. And you're not going to measure the depth of their sincerity. And if they're playing and distracted, Mommy, I love you. And it's also, that's balm to your soul. Hearing that from a child. And Hashem loves us. You imagine, the Baal Shem Tov taught this. Hashem loves every Jew immeasurably more than parents who will love an only child born to them later in life. Can you imagine this child? One child, they've given up, and then the 40s or 50s, they're blessed with a child. That's how every single Jew is for God, and more so. So for us to say these words, even if we're not so engaged and we're distracted, it's also meaningful. It's also meaningful for Hashem. We're saying these words that He wants to hear. Of course, say them with your heart. Of course, that's so much richer and deeper and more meaningful. But there's still value in just saying those words. So back to the house. So that's the basic. Then, further levels, say the Amidah every day, once a day. If you can do it twice a day, that's great. The Shema, we said you should say the Shema. Here's a model. I don't know, again, each person would have to be, you'd have to ask me privately, this is how much time I have, this is how fluent I am, what should I say? It's not one shoe fits all. As much as you can, basically. But what you've heard is, the Amidah is critical. Here's a few important prayers. The Shema is critical. The Ashrei. Ashrei, you said, I'll say, just say, he who says Ashrei 3 times a day is a shorter place in the world to come. It's kind of, we spoke about it in Shul. Ashrei is a beautiful prayer. There's a whole alphabet there, and it is maybe the most famous of all the Psalms, the Ashrei. That, more time, the Baruch She'omar. We need to open the Siddur to see what I'm talking about, but just keep on expanding. Amidah number 1, then Shema, Ashrei, the Baruch She'omar, the Olein, or the end of the service, which I try and get everybody to sing here because of its powerful message and send off. That's something. And of course, the Ach Tzadikim prayer we say every week here, the prayer for peace, which I think is on that card, that little Ach Tzadikim. Hebrew, English, what's the deal? Very important question. So here are the general rules. I think the service is going to be in the, listen, sorry. I'm getting only tangled in blue here. Okay. We spoke about this last Shabbos. Prayer, first and foremost, it's a service of the heart. What does that mean? There are two levels to intent. One is just conscious of, I am talking to God. Acknowledging, praising, thanking, requesting, confessing, whatever it is that I'm doing then in prayer. I'm not speaking about the meaning of the actual words, just that general intent. That's the foundation, that's necessary. What about understanding what you're saying? So, if someone doesn't read Hebrew, there's nothing to talk about. Say it in English, and that's the end of the story. Finished. And that's bona fide prayer, 100%. The question is really the one who can read Hebrew and doesn't understand Hebrew. That's the question. What is better? To pray in Hebrew and I don't understand, I just have the general awareness that I'm talking to God, that's critical. Or is it better to pray in English because I know what I'm saying? That's the real question. No, so what's the answer? A compromise, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And it's very simple. Today with our Siddurim, here in FTC and most synagogues, they translate it. Before you say it in Hebrew, just read through the paragraph. So you don't know the exact translation of the word, but you do know what that paragraph is saying. That's the optimum. Now you might be asking, so why even say the Hebrew? If prayer is 100% halachically acceptable to pray in any language, that's the law, even the Shema, Hear, O Israel, God our Lord, God is one, then why even say the Hebrew? Just say the English and I'll get more prayers in. If you follow my advice, you're not going to end up saying all that much because you are saying it in Hebrew, perhaps very slowly. You know what you're saying generally because you looked at the English. So dispense with the Hebrew. I'm asking, say only the English. What's wrong? The answer is nothing. However, the Hebrew words are much more than just the Hebrew words of the English text. The words are sacred. The letters are sacred. Just consider that these very words have been said. Prayers in the... Yeah. Consider that these words have been said by our ancestors for 2,000 years. They are tear-soaked. They are drenched with soul and with heart. They said these words. You just know I'm saying the same words that my grandmother, my mother, my great-grandmother. That is, even without knowing the translation, that lends so much emotion to your prayer. They're sacred. They're sacred for a deeper reason too, not only because they were said by our ancestors. And they were said, like today's story, often praying, coming together to make a minyan, risking their lives if they would discover a public prayer in underground Russia. Or during the Greek occupation, the story of Hanukkah, where public prayer was forbidden. And we have that freedom to say these words. How precious is that? But more than that, the words themselves are divine. The Hebrew language was not made up by man, like all other languages. It's authored by God. Every letter, friends, is a channel of divine energy. The Hebrew word for letter is ot. Ot means a letter, and ot means to come forth. Which means, when we say those letters, we're eliciting God's revelation, expression. We're drawing down, as it were, metaphorically, God's presence into the world. The letters have that power. They're channels. Every Hebrew letter is a channel of divine energy and therefore blessing. Entire volumes, which would make encyclopedias, literally, are written on the Hebrew alphabet. Every letter is a word, it's a number, it's a shape. The shape of the letters. Entire study. And what it means, how every shape is actually conveying what divine energy this letter is the conduit for. Just to say the letters is incredible. Famous story of the Baal Shem Tov. It was one Yom Kippur, and we know Yom Kippur of the holiest day of the year. That's when our fate is sealed. And the story goes, the Baal Shem Tov was locked in prayer. Everybody sensed that he was waging a battle in heaven because heaven was deciding what was going to be for this community or the Jewish community at large. And there was a little farm boy who would only come to shul. They lived in the farms and the hamlets, and would only come to synagogue high holidays. That was very common in Europe in those days. This is 300, 400 years ago. And he couldn't read, but he knew the Aleph base. In the back of the shul, he simply said, Aleph, Bet, by heart, Gimel, Dalet. He said, dear God, I can't combine these in letters. You combine them into the letters, and you compose my prayer. Baal Shem Tov sensed his presence, didn't see him, but sensed it, and saw that the heavens opened, and saw these letters piercing the heavens, piercing the dark cloud of the decree hanging over the Jewish people, because we weren't up to scratch. And it's thanks to this Aleph base that the Jewish people were blessed with a good year. Another occasion, there was a kukuriku of a farm boy. He couldn't even say another child couldn't say the Aleph base. Everybody's praying with such fervor, and he, wanting to join the prayers, he knew how to imitate the farm animals very well. That was his talent, and he imitated the rooster. And at the top of his lungs, he cried out like the rooster, kukuriku. And people turned around, Yom Kippur Shara. And the Baal Shem Tov hushed them and explained later, we're all blessed this year because of this kukuriku of this child that comes from the heart. And many stories like that. And one more about the power of the Hebrew words, just the words itself. It's hard to imagine, but going back 400 years ago, 300 years ago, most Jews, never mind women, most Jews, men, were illiterate. After the Chmielnicki pogroms that ravaged Eastern Europe, Jewish life was at all low, dismal point, economically, spiritually. You had the elite scholars, which were a minority. Most Jews were, the masses, ignorant and felt alienated. It's one of the great revolutions of the Hasidic movement that Baal Shem Tov taught that God wants the heart, and the scholars in their arrogance were actually much further from God than the simple Jew, as it were. Anyway, so there was a Jew, a simple fellow. Try as he might, he could not learn how to read. Couldn't. He would ask people in the scholars to teach him, or the young kids to teach him. It would go in this ear. One word he managed to learn by heart. One word that stuck in his head, and it's the word tameh. Tameh. Tameh means impure. That's what it means. But that's the only word he could get into his head. Now, he knew that, what the word meant, but it's the only word he could remember. He spoke Russian, Yiddish, Polish, whatever it was. What was his vocation? There was a river in that town, and he had a raft, and he would ferry people across the river. In the middle of the river, when he thought nobody could hear him, that's when he prayed. And what was his whole prayer word? He would scream, cry over and over again, Tameh, 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 Tameh. And that was his prayer. Now, the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov, this was in Mezhibush. So they hear this poor fellow, and he's saying Tameh, and they're thinking to themselves, look, if he's going to learn one word, let's teach him the word tahor, which means pure. It's the inverse. You're going to say one word, they scream the word Tameh, impure, impure, impure. So they sit the fellow down and they say, look, this word, you know what it means. We're going to teach you another word, one word. Repeat after me. Tahor, 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 tahor. Okay. Next day, he can't remember that word. And they told him it's not appropriate to say the word tameh. He doesn't say anything. So the next day, out on the raft, silence. The Baal Shem Tov realized something was afoot, calls in his disciples, why is this Jew, why am I not hearing his tameh from the raft? They said, well, the Rebbe, it was tameh, it's not a nice word, so we try to teach him tahor. Baal Shem Tov was very upset with him. You bring him here immediately. And he told him, you continue saying tameh, and chastised the students and said, if you would know how with this tameh, this word, impure, impure, how he lit up the heavens and the pleasure and delight that he brought to our Father in heaven, you would not dare approach him in any way, try to educate him. So friends, this is the power of two things. The heart, the sincerity of the heart, that is the most critical part of prayer. But even these words, they're sacred words, and they elicit blessing. So ideally, both. If you read Hebrew slowly, and again, how slow? If it's very, very slow, so you'll say only a few lines in Hebrew and the rest, most will be in English. As you become more proficient, you'll try and do both. Let's open the questions. Yes?
I just want to ask you, when you're praying, whether it's Hebrew or English, are you supposed to form the words and say them?
Oh, that's so important. Thank you, Risa, for bringing that up.
Some people read them to themselves and they're finished and...
Thank you. I wouldn't have said anything, and I would have been terribly remiss. This is very, very important. Indeed so, and this story led us to that, right? Prayers have to be articulated. The mouth, you want to engage the mouth, the body in this sacred connection with Hashem. So you've got to say it, whether it's in Hebrew or in English. It has to be said that your own ears can hear it. Even the Amidah, which is said in an undertone, it's an undertone, but not reading. We don't read prayers. We chant them, we sing them, we recite them, we say them. That's very, very important. Yeah, one does not fulfill the obligation if one doesn't actually articulate the words. And the reason is to engage the physical body as well, not just the soul. But the body is part of this connection. So the mouth says it, the voice box says it, the ears can hear it. And also, when you articulate it, express it with voice, it intensifies the intent, the emotion. That's the power of the spoken word. You can have an emotion, you're feeling something. You're at the airport and a dear beloved, a child or family members or a loved one, a husband is going away. In those days, I'm thinking when I was a kid, when people left overseas, that was, didn't see them again, in those days. So you're at the airport, as soon as you start saying goodbye, all of a sudden the tears are, you're feeling it, you say the words, or in any emotion, love or anger. You're feeling angry. But the moment you express it in words, it starts to intensify. It's the power of words. It causes whatever emotion I'm feeling to well up, hopefully good emotions. So in prayer as well, if I'm praying to God and I say the words and my ears hear them, that intensifies for me the feeling. So that's another reason why it is critical to actually articulate the words. There are some Hasidic groups that they pray really loud and they will shout the words. There's all kinds of customs. First time I experienced that, it was a shock. The Yehesh Meirabah, that they say, it's the Karliner Chassidim, famous Hasidic group from dates back hundreds of years in Poland. So they have a custom to the Yehesh Meirabah, which is part of the Kaddish, which you respond to when the reader says Kaddish, they say it as loud as they can. And if you've never experienced this, all of a sudden it's praying, and Yehesh Meirabah! That's their thing. That's their thing. We don't have to scream that loud, but you should articulate the words. Thank you. Now, the synagogue. So we're talking about the synagogue. I made, 50 copies of this. Take it home just to get a sense. What is this? This chart is the table of prohibited interruptions during prayer. What can you say and when? Depending where you're up to, you're not with the service. This whole elaborate table, conversation is not part of it. From the time, there are times you were allowed to talk, in between the aliyahs, before the Baruch She'omar, but the bulk of prayer, actually, we're not allowed to talk. This whole thing tells you what prayers can you respond to if the congregation is further ahead, or you're whatever. You have to go to the bathroom, come back to you, say, yeah, this is an important prayer. The prayer that we say after relieving ourselves, friends. Just think about that for a minute. How powerful that is. You're not taking for granted that a body functions. I mean, how terrible illnesses and pain and discomfort, God forbid if it doesn't. And the prayer it's a short little prayer, it's in every standard prayer book, and we actually say it. After every time we go to the bathroom, we wash our hands ritually outside the bathroom, and we say this prayer. After a while, you learn it by heart, Hebrew or English. And it talks about the wonder of the human body. And the openings that have to open and which has to be closed, and it functions. I mean, how powerful is this in terms of gratitude, of humility, of praise, of the acknowledgement of the miracle of the functioning human body. And someone who says that, it's not just limited to thank you for my body, it extends to gratitude in all things. You just don't take for granted. Wake up in the morning, thank you for restoring my soul, I'm alive. You walk, we say thank you. The morning prayers, that list we looked at, that's high on the list. It's really the Amidah, Shema, and morning prayers. Because that's gratitude for the functions of life. This leads to such a happy person, if you really take this seriously. Gratitude. It's all a privilege. There's no entitlement. Being born is a gift. Being able to see is a gift. To walk, to hear. Clothes to put on. A person who lives with gratitude is just a wonderful person to be around. And prayer cultivates that every day. It cultivates it. So, we're coming to shul. The parts where we may not speak, really, again, is the bulk of the morning prayer. It's from the Baruch Shem until after the Amidah. We're not allowed to talk. If we think we're in the presence of the King, He's looking earnestly at us and can't wait for the words we have to say, and then it's not nice. It's just not nice. So I'll give out these papers. You just look at it. It gives you a sense of, whoa, this is serious business. And the whole body of laws dealing with interruption during prayer. So you come to shul late on Shabbos, the same rules apply. Say the Shema, say the Amidah, Hebrew or in English. When you're saying them, God forbid, these are very serious prayers or declarations, there's no interruption. The Amidah, it's so serious, even someone talks to you, you may not respond. You're not allowed to respond. Unless it's life-threatening. Life-threatening, of course, we do what we have to do. But if someone comes in, good Shabbos, how are you? You're not allowed to say anything. So there are parts of prayer where you can kind of nod and say, later, but you gesture, but the Amidah, you can't even do that. Yes? That's a very good question. Yeah, so it's a very good question. Torah reading, a woman is not obligated to hear the Torah reading because it's one of those things you have to do at certain times. On the other hand, it's certainly laudable and respectful to stop what you're doing and listen to the Torah reading. The law for a guy, for example, is if he's in the middle of prayer, he has to stop and listen to the Torah reading and then continue. He may not pray where the Torah is being read. Only the Amidah is the exception. You may not interrupt the Amidah. But any other part of prayer for a guy, because he has to hear the Torah reading, he has to stop. A woman is not obligated. So if you're pressed for time and you can't do both, hear Torah reading and do your prayers, then you'll say your prayer during Torah reading. But I would say, for the Amidah, maybe even to step out or go in a corner there, shouldn't look that disrespectful that here they're reading the Torah and you're doing your own thing. So you want to keep it kind of low-key. But again, with time restraints, say the prayers that you do. That is more obligatory, as we learned, than Torah reading, which is not an obligation, although a wonderful thing to listen to. So let's open up the floor, at this point again for questions. We'll try and answer you if we can. Your particular case. Yes. Okay, so that's in this chart. In answer to your question specifically, when you say the Amidah, there's almost no interruption. And if they're saying the Kedusha, then you simply stop, but you do not say the Kedusha with them. But what you can do is try and time it to say the Amidah when the Chazan repeats it together with the Chazan. So if you're saying the Amidah with the Chazan, you will say the Kedusha with the congregation at that point where the Chazan is. You follow? You try and time it to do it that way. The Amidah is like really, really serious. Our sages say a serpent that's wrapped around a person's foot during the Amidah, he may not interrupt unless it's a poisonous snake. That's how serious this is, the Amidah. Yeah.
Somebody wants to get through, can you move, not talk to them, but move the way you let them in?
If there's another way for them to get around, no. But if there's no other way, you could. So
Some people don't know.
they try, like the row of seats, and you're here saying they're trying to get to their place. They just have to get around you. That's all. They can get there. If they can't, you'll move, but they can. Yes.
But how much space would there be between people when you're saying these?
That's a good question. Practically is one thing. Ideally, especially when the Amidah during a weekday involves confession, and in the old days people used to confess privately, you shouldn't be within earshot of the person. But practically speaking, one thing is for sure, when someone's having Amidah, you should avoid, if they're saying the Amidah, being in their 4 cubits, particularly not in front or behind. The side is not so distracting, but behind or in front, you shouldn't even be close to them. Again, practically, we tend to be, squished in shul, so it's hard to observe that practically, but it does point out, as you're asking correctly, the respect for someone saying the Amidah. We shouldn't walk in front of them, we shouldn't be close to them, shouldn't be talking near them, not to disturb them.
When the document is put on are we supposed to be standing, even if we're not up to them?
Yes, when a good point too. When the congregation says the Amidah, and even though we've come late, we're not up to there personally, we have to stand together with them. Yep, just respectful otherwise.
And do you start at the beginning or do you continue where they are?
So I'm saying, you come late, you say your Shema and your Amidah, no matter where they're up to.
Well, basically, what I'm asking is after we do the Amidah ourselves.
Then you can join the congregation.
And then even though the congregation starts before I'm finished, do I start at the beginning or
I'm not following you.
continue?
Congregation's gone ahead of you or they're behind you?
Ahead of
You finish the Amidah, join them, wherever they're up to.
wherever they're at.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'll leave this on the table. You can take this, ladies, just to get a sense of, this is no joke, as my principal rabbi would say, Rabbi Gron Olav Shalom. It's no joke, and it isn't. It's happy, but not a joke. It's a big difference. It's a very happy, simcha thing, but a joke it isn't. So here, that paper for your, you can pass them around here, just get a sense of it. Supposed to go what? No. The Kedusha you do. Kodesh, Kodesh, Kodesh. Up on your toes? No. No, you turn your head, but not on your toes. Oh, you just, as you conclude, yeah. And people do it. I don't think there's any source for that. I don't see any source for it. You go 3 steps back and that's it.